Hi there, this is Celeste Bartels, and I'm a teaching assistant for the sports marketing class within the College of Business at Kansas State University. And today we're going to work through an Excel problem, and by the end of our time together, you should have developed many of the skills that employers are looking for from recent college grads related to Excel. So this activity was developed by Dr. Doug Walker of Kansas State University, and he worked with Target and Union Pacific, asking them what kind of skills their employees need to be successful when using Excel, and then based on those necessary skills, he developed this activity for us today. So if you look at the narrative tab on this Excel spreadsheet, you'll see kind of the situation that we're given, and then the tasks 1 through 19. So you are a sales manager of over 3 regions encompassing 14 states covered by 6 salespeople, and these details are found on the organization tab, which you can see down here. On the dataset tab, you will find sales call counts, number of purchases, and total dollar purchase amounts of each of these customers aggregated by quarter for the past year. You have 599 customers. So we're going to work through each of these tasks in order, starting with task number 1. So freeze the top row of the dataset so that the column headings are still visible as you scroll down the dataset. Then freeze the first 3 columns and the top row. So we're going to click to our dataset. And now you can see all of the data set that we were given. Again, this is just part of the Excel file that you downloaded with your instructions. So in order to freeze this top row, so everything that I just highlighted right here, our goal is for this to show no matter how far we scroll down. So you can see when I scroll down, I lose track of this top row, but because they're column headings, it's rather important that we be able to see them at all times. So in order to do that, we just click here on View, go to Freeze Panes, and then hit Freeze Top Row. So now you can see that as I scroll down, see over here I'm in row 26, I can still see the first row. So we're going to go ahead and undo that. If you hit View, Freeze Panes, Unfreeze Panes. So that takes us back to where when I scroll down, that first row is not visible. And the reason that we undid that is because we want not only the top row, but also the first 4 columns to stay frozen. So what we're hoping to do here is have columns A through D be visible at all times, no matter how far right I scroll. In order to do that, you're going to click in the first cell of where that region intersects. So here we want A through D to be frozen, and then we want row 1 to be frozen. So the first cell that we don't want to be frozen is E2, and you'll go up to View, click on Freeze Panes, and then hit Freeze Panes again. And now you'll see as I scroll to the right, can you see how column D stays even though E disappears? And then as I scroll down, row number 1 stays the same. So that brings us to the completion of task number 1. Okay, now we're going to get started on task 2. Sort the dataset first by salesperson and then by state. So in order to do that, we're going to select all of our data, so cells A1, hit Shift, and then scroll down to the bottom. Oop, too far. We're to cell P600 right here, and when you hit Shift before you click in that P600, then it will highlight that entire region. We're going to go up to the Data tab, click on Sort. Make sure that this box right here, My Data Has Headers, is selected. We have to do that so that way it doesn't change, so that way it takes into consideration that this first row is headers rather than values of your data. Okay, so we've been instructed to sort it first by salesperson. So we're going to go here to next to the sort by and click on SP, which stands for salesperson. Smallest to largest is right. And then our second sort is by state. So we're going to click on add level, change this to state, and then we want smallest to largest again. We'll click OK. Now it's just changed, it's just sorted our data so that it's sorted by salesperson and then by state. So that comes to the completion of task 2. Okay, for task 3, we're going to sort the columns for calls, purchase, and dollars in ascending order from left to right rather than descending order by quarter, keeping the calls, purchase, and dollar columns together. So what these instructions are talking about is here in cells or columns E through H, you can see that calls up here are not in correct order. They're in descending order rather than ascending order. So what we're going to do is sort these 4 columns so that calls 1 is over here and calls 4 is over here, and that 2 and 3 switch places. So in order to do that, we're going to select the columns. So I click up here first on E, hold down Shift, and then go over and click on H. Now we're going to go up to Data, Sort. Okay, now we want to remove data has headers. So make sure you unclick that box. Okay, click on Options, and then we want to sort from left to right rather than top to bottom. Hit OK. Now right here in Sort By, we're going to sort by row 1 and hit OK. So typically when you use the sort function, it sorts your data this way. So when you can see over here when we changed our sorting by salesperson and state, it put these in numerical order over here. But when you change it, as we just did, let me go back to that screen to show you here. When you click here on this options and change it from top to bottom to left to right, what that does for us is it organizes the cells, the columns that you've collected numerically in order this way. Alright, we're going to repeat this for the purchases column. So click on the top of I, hold down your Shift and click on the top of L. Go up to Data, Sort. So your settings should stay the same. So if you want to double click, go up to Options, make sure it says left to right. Sort by row 1 again, because that's the only one, that's the row that's most important to us because we want those purchases, purchase 1 through 4, to be in order. Click on OK. And then finally repeat it for the last set. Okay, and that brings us to the end of task 3. Task 4. Insert 3 new columns, E, F, and G, into your data set using Home Insert on the ribbon. So we're going to add cells columns, E, F, and G. So first thing that you're going to do is select these 3. So click on the top of E, hit Shift, click on the top of G, go to Home, Insert, and Insert Sheet Columns. So you can see here, let me scroll up, that it just added these 3 new columns for us. And so for task 5, we're going to do that right now. We're going to undo what we just did in task 4 by pressing Control and then Z. So hold down Control, click on Z. It undoes the previous action and removes those 3 columns. So that brings us to the end of task 5. Okay, for task 6, we're instructed to insert 3 new columns, E, F, and G, into your data set using the shortcut Control+, and then label the columns region, state, and salesperson respectively. So we're going to select columns E through G by clicking on the top of E, hold down your shift, click on the top of G, and we're going to use the shortcut Control+, and that adds our 3 new columns right there. We've been instructed to title them Region, State, and Salesperson. So in order to type in those cells, if you're unfamiliar with that, you just click on the cell and you can start typing right away. But if you need to make a change to what you typed, go up here to the formula bar and click, and then you're allowed to edit it. Otherwise, if you were to just click on this box and try to change something, it deletes the whole word. Alright, we're going to click here and pull this over to make them the right size of columns, or you can hover right over the line dividing the 2 columns and double click. That expands the column so it's an appropriate width based on the text that's within the column. And that's the end of task 6. Task 7. Using the VLOOKUP function, insert formulas into cells E, F, and G2 to retrieve the names of the region, states, and salespeople from the table on the Organization tab. Okay, so VLOOKUP functions can often be kind of confusing or maybe even intimidating, so we're going to walk through this in 2 separate ways. The first way that we'll do is if you're new to VLOOKUP functions, and then the second will be if you have a better, more familiar understanding of VLOOKUP. So what this is instructing us to do is to use this function to bring over information from this Organization tab based on a reference from this region, state, and salesperson column. So in order to do that, here, let me show you what this looks like. So what we're going to do is use, for example, Region 1. Based on Region 1, we're going to instruct Excel to go over to the Organization tab and bring us information from Region 1 and bring it back and insert it into this cell. So it's not as complex as it may seem, but a little hard to wrap your head around the first time that you do it. So to get a little bit of help, we're going to use the formula builder within Excel. It's a really nice feature if you're new or unfamiliar with a function. So hit equals and then VLOOKUP, and then you can click either right here, and that will kind of add your open parentheses, but I would recommend clicking up here on this little FX right to the left of the formula bar, because it brings up this box that gives you instructions on how to use the VLOOKUP formula. So here for our lookup value, this is asking us to enter the reference that we want to use. So in this example, we're wanting to pull information from the Organization tab based on Region 1. So that's why I'm going to click right here in cell B2. Table array. So this is the from where the values, where the data is retrieved from. So we're going to look at the Organization tab, and we're going to click here on Region to Region. So this is the information, the box that I just highlighted is only information that's relevant to the VLOOKUP that we're doing. So if you were to click region over to state, that would mess up your information. So just highlight the information that's relevant for this particular formula. And so because the value that I'm referencing is going to be here in this column, and then the information that I want it to bring back to my other sheet is found in this column, that's why I select all 4 of those columns. Okay, column index number is the column that you want Excel to bring the value back from. So of the table that you just had highlighted, so let me show you what that looked like here again. So this was the table that I highlighted and said was my table array. Which column is important for us, it's this fourth column, 1, 2, 3, 4. This is the information that we want Excel to bring back and put into our cell that we're building the formula in, which is E2. So we're going to type a 4 in here, representing the fourth column, and then range lookup. So this wants either a true or a false entry here. So if you were to type in true, this is more relevant for value searches. So it'll find, if you type in true, then Excel will return the first value that is close enough to the value that you were searching for, or the reference, the lookup value. However, in this situation, we're going to type in false because we want the value that Excel returns to be an exact match for what we're looking for. So that's why we type false. And if you ever forget which one is which, that's described down here in these instructions. So now we're going to hit OK. Okay, so now you can see using this value, Excel went to the data that we selected and brought over information from the fourth column, and it was an exact match. So that's all the VLOOKUP function does. However, in order for us to be able to drag this formula down, we need to add absolute cell references, which means that every time Excel looks for the value, it's always going to look at A2 through D15, which is important because for us over here, after D15, there's no information in your formula will be messed up. So in order to make sure it always uses this information from that range of data, you add $signs, which is known as an absolute cell reference, and you add it before and after the letter for both of the range of values, and then hit enter. Okay, now we're going to do this again using the same VLOOKUP, but this time we want it to bring us state information. So we're going to use the formula builder here again. So this time we want information regarding the state, so we're going to click on C2 rather than B2. Our table array, so this is where the range of data that we want Excel to look at. So we're going to highlight only the relevant data. So this time, because we're looking at state, we just highlight the cells containing state. If you were to select the region here, it would mess up your formula farther down in Excel when you drag it down. Column index number, that's going to be number 4. If you forget, you can always go back and look. So I highlighted, this was my first column, I highlighted second, third, and fourth. And because this column contains the information about the state that we want Excel to bring back to our other data set tab, that's why you type in 4 here. So it's not that this is the fourth of the overall data, it's that this is the fourth column of the relevant data that you highlighted here in the table array. So make sure that just says 4. When you switch between tabs, Excel likes to add things there that are unnecessary. So you just want that to say 4 for the fourth column. And then again, we're going to type false because we want it to be an exact match. And then if you look down here, you can see that the result of our formula for this cell is TX for Texas, and that's correct. So that's a good way to double check yourself. But don't forget to go back up into the formula by clicking in the formula bar and adding your absolute cell references, so that no matter where you drag the formula down to, Excel always references data between B2 and E15. Okay, the other way that you can use the VLOOKUP function as you get a little bit more familiar with it is to type it in yourself and hit an open parentheses, and then it still gives you the information that you need, the order that the information should be input as, but it's just a little bit faster if you're familiar with how this function works. So our lookup value in this situation is going to be SP. I'm going to hit a comma. You can see now it moves over in bold's table array for me, so it's telling me It's asking me where I want my information to come from, so I go and select this, hit my comma, go back to the dataset tab, make sure that you delete that when you switch between tabs. I want it to come from the 4th column of the dataset that I selected for the table array, and then I want it to be an exact match, so I type in false, and I hit close parentheses, and then you can hit equals, or enter, sorry. And that brings over the name Michael from this organization tab. Now don't forget to go back in and add your absolute references. So in order to do that, kind of a shortcut is to click on your F4 key. So on my computer, when I click on F4 at the top line of my keyboard, nothing happens. So I need to hold down Fn, which is in the bottom left-hand side of my laptop keyboard. So click on Fn and hold it down, and then click F4, and it automatically adds those $signs in there for you. So now again, I'll show you. Click between the letter and the numbers, hold down Fn, click F4, and it adds those $signs automatically. Okay, for task 8, we're going to copy down the formulas entered in task 7, first using Control-D shortcut, then we're going to undo it using Control-Z, and copy them down by using clicking on the bottom right corner of the cell. So the first thing that we'll do here is highlight. I'll just show you with a couple cells here. So if you highlight the cells that you want it to copy to, and then hit Control-D, you can see it automatically fills those in. Now to undo, click on Control, hold it down, and click Z. It'll undo your previous action. So my favorite Excel shortcut is to click on the cell that you have the formula in, hover over the bottom right corner where you see that little green box until your cursor turns from a big white plus sign into a black plus sign, and then when it turns into that, you double click, and it automatically drags that formula down. So now when I look down here, I can see that my formula dragged down, and it correctly brought over the information from the organization tab. To ensure that your formula was dragged down rather than just the contents of that cell, you can click on any one of these cells and look up here in the formula bar and see that it's a formula that's typed in there. And the nice thing about double clicking is that in that bottom right corner is that it automatically fills the data, fills that formula down until you want it to stop. So notice that none of these cells down here have anything because Excel knew where I wanted it to stop. So we're going to repeat that here with Texas. Hover over the bottom right hand corner, double click, it automatically fills it in. Same for salesperson. And that's the end of task 8. Task 9. Insert a new column into your data set, column B, and label the column code. Create a text code that incorporates the first, third, and last letter of the region, a dash, the state code, another dash, and the customer ID number. So this one, task 9 here, has several steps. So we're going to start by first inserting a new column. So you're going to actually highlight the column that is currently where you want to insert your new column. So for example, if I wanted to add a new column between K and L, I would click right here on L, and inserting a column would be inserted in the place of the column that I currently have highlighted. So I want column B to be where my new column is placed, so that's why I highlight B. Right click, go down to insert, and it automatically adds a new column there. We're going to call this code. And now we're going to insert a formula that brings information from these cells over here and this customer ID together into one text string within this column. So I'm going to widen this up a little bit. Okay, so this is a really cool formula. I believe it's pronounced concatenate. If that's not how it's pronounced, that's how I remember to spell it correctly. So you're going to hit equals and then concatenate. Hit your open parentheses. So this would be another good one that if you're unfamiliar with how this function works, you can go up here and click on the little FX insert function, and it'll give you instructions here on how to fill it in. Okay, so the first thing that we want is the first, third, and last letter of the region. So we're going to look, the first thing we want is the left side. We're looking at cell F2 for region, and then you can see here the text that's relevant and then the number of characters from that text. I just want one. I want the first character. So I'm going to hit a close parentheses. Now don't forget your comma. Now for the middle, I just type mid, open parentheses. I'm still looking at F2. This time I want the U to come out of the middle. So my start number is going to be 3. So after F2, hit a comma. Your start number is 3 because U is the third letter. And then you hit comma again. I just want that one character, so I'm going to type 1. If I wanted it to pull the U and the T, then I would put a 2 here. But because I just want the U, I put a 1. Close parentheses, hit a comma. Now we want to type in right, open parentheses. The text that's relevant is still coming from cell F2, so click on F2. Hit your comma, and you just want one character. Hit your close parentheses. Okay, so what we've done here is pull the letters S, U, and H out of the word south, the first, third, and last letter. So using left means it's going to start from the left of the word in cell F2 and only bring me one text character. By mid, it means I'm pulling from the middle of the word in cell F2, the third character, and I just want that one character. By typing in right, I'm looking in cell F2, and I just want the one character on the right side of that word in that cell. Does that make sense how that works? Okay, so now that's not all that we want. We also want Excel to bring us a dash and then the state code. So in order to add a dash into Excel, it thinks it's a minus sign. So to tell Excel that it's not a minus and you're not trying to subtract within this formula, you add quotation marks. So don't forget your comma after that whole text string. Add a quotation mark, a dash, and then close the quotation marks. Now you need another comma. You need a comma separating any complete reference. So here I have commas separating the middle, the information about the character I want from the middle of the word, and the information that I want from the right side of the word. So make sure you have a comma between each one of these pieces of information. Now I want the state code, so I can just go ahead and click right here on G2. I add a comma. Now I want another dash, so I'm going to add a dash, but I need to have the quotation marks around it. You need another comma. And then the last thing that we've been instructed is to add the customer ID number. So you can go over here and click right on A2. It adds that customer ID number. That's the last piece of information that we want Excel to string together for us. So now we're going to hit Shift and close your parentheses, and then go ahead and hit Enter. And you can see that using this concatenate formula in Excel, it brought over S, U, and H, the first, third, and last letter of the word within cell F2. It gave us a dash. Texas, the state code from cell G2. Another dash shows up right here, and then the customer ID number. Okay, and let's see here. Is that all we want from there? Yeah, okay, so that's the end of task 9. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and copy this formula down by double clicking. In the bottom right corner, you can see that each cell is unique based on the customer ID over here. And then when we scroll down, you can see that it still worked correctly for Midwest. It brought the first, third, and last letter of the word Midwest. Here's Kansas, and then still the customer ID number. So it's always good to go down and check and make sure that the formula worked for your complete data set. So now what you can see up here is that we still have the formula in the formula bar. So task 10 instructs us to turn the formulas from task 9 into values. So we don't want these formulas to show up anymore, we just want the values. So in order to do that, we're going to select cells B2 through 600. Okay, here we go. And then hit shift and then click on 600. It highlights that column for me. And hit Control C to copy. Now go to Home, Paste. Go down here to Paste Special and click on Values. Hit OK. And what that just did is you could see it change if you paid attention. Maybe rewind the video and look. When I hit OK, this changed from a formula just into the value that was within that cell. So that makes it easier for us to reference later. And that's the end of task 10. Task 11, sum the quarterly calls, purchases in dollars in columns U, V, and W respectively. Label them sum calls, sum perch, and sum dollars. Alright, I'm going to scroll over so I can see columns U, V, and W. Okay, so I'm going to put my column headings in first so I don't get confused. And I'm coming up with these names based on what the instructions say. Okay, so now right here what we want is to sum up the data that is that's relevant for calls. So basically I'm going to take all of these cells, oops, let me just show you calls 1 here, and just provide a sum of the data in those 4 cells over here under calls. So hit equals, sum, open parentheses. I'm going to click on the first value that's relevant, hit shift, and then click on the last value that's relevant, the last cell. Then if you look up here in the formula bar, you can see it automatically added a colon for me. Hit a close parenthesis. Hit enter. Another way to do this is sum equals sum open parentheses. So now you could just type it in. So I'm looking for a purchase, so it's under cell M2. I'm just going to type M2. I'm going to type a colon and then P2. So did you see how that when I typed in P2 it automatically highlighted the 4 cells that are in that range? You can hit shift, close your parentheses, and hit enter. And let's do it again for some dollars. So equals sum of Q2. You can also use a period. So if typing a colon is difficult on your computer, you can use a period here. And then click on the other cell that's relevant and it automatically highlights those. However, if you put a comma, if you were to put a comma here instead of a colon or a period, let me show you what happens. So see how it just highlights those 2 cells? So it doesn't bring you the data that's in between in columns R and S. It would just bring you the sum of cell Q2 and T2, which is not what we want. We want the sum of all 4 of these columns. So in order to achieve that, you either hit a period here. See how it highlights all 4 of those blue? You can type in, oops, I moved over one. You can type in a colon, or you can hold down shift and just highlight all 4 cells automatically. Okay. Now we're going to copy these formulas down by double clicking. And that is the end of task 11. Task 12. In cell Z2, type no perch, and in cell Z3, type perch. So that stands for purchase and no purchase. Okay, and then on the dataset tab, enter a COUNTIF formula that counts the number of customers that produced no sales in the year. So it says to do that in cell X1, but I'm going to go ahead and do it over here in cell AA2. And we're going to use a COUNTIF formula. So hit equals, type in count if, open parentheses. So if you've never used a COUNTIF formula before, it's pretty cool. So you're going to give Excel a range of values to evaluate, and it's going to, and then also a criteria that those values should meet. And if the value in that cell meets the criteria, then it counts that cell. So for example, we have 599 customers. You could put a 1 in the column if they're male and a 0 if they're female, and then you could ask Excel to go down and count the number of 1s within that column, and it would be able to tell you how many of your customers were male. So that's just a basic example. In this situation, we're going to use the COUNTIF to tell us if they did purchase from us this year or if they didn't. So in order to do that, we type in our equals COUNTIF. Now we're going to give it the range. So we're looking at the purchases column, which is column V, some perch here. So starting with V2. Remember, you can put in either a period here or a colon when indicating a range, and then I know the bottom of my data set ends at V600. So that's the relevant data. See how it highlighted that blue for me here. Now I'm going to hit a comma, and now I'm going to type in the criteria that I want Excel to look for. So this situation, because we're trying to figure out if they did not make a purchase, then the value in cell V, whatever the value from this column would be equal to 0. So all you do is type a 0, close your parentheses, and hit equals. So of our 599 customers, 29 of them did not make a purchase. We're going to do it again, but this time we're going to count that they did make a purchase. COUNTIF, open parentheses, we're still looking at the same range of values, V2 through V600, add your comma. This time our criteria is that it is greater than 0, so that they did make a purchase. So if you hit greater than 0, close your parentheses. Now Excel's going to yell at you here. So it wants you to add quotation marks because it helps Excel differentiate between when you're trying to add a formula and when you're not. So it thinks that this greater than sign is part of a formula, but it's really not. So that's why you add these quotation marks around before the greater than sign and after the 0, and now it will work. So if you're ever unsure whether you need quotation marks, do it without it first, and then Excel will correct you if necessary. Okay, that's the end of task 12, so that makes sense. These two numbers should add up because we counted everybody within this column, and we know we have 599 customers that was given to us under this narratives tab. So when you add these two together, you should get 599 because they either did make a purchase or they didn't. There's nobody that's left out of one of these two categories. So that's just a good way to double check yourself. Task 13, in cell AA1, type count, and in cell AB1, type average. In cell AB3, I'm going to go right here, on the Dataset tab, enter an average if formula that calculates the average dollar amounts for the year for all customers that made at least one purchase. Okay, so the average if function looks a lot like and works a lot like the count if function, but rather than just counting the number of cells that meet the criteria, it's going to take the average of the values within those cells. So we're going to type equals average if, open parentheses, we're looking at our range. So we're still using the same range whether they did or didn't make a purchase within column V. So it's still V2 to V600. Close that range off by adding a comma. So we want to know our criteria is that they did make a purchase. So that means it's the value within that cell is greater than 0. So this so far should be exactly like what we did over here for the purchase. So don't forget your quotation marks. Add a comma. And now we want the average of the dollar amount that those purchases made. So this tells us that they did make a purchase, and if they did make a purchase, we want to know what the average purchase was. So now we're going to look at column W for average dollars here. So the range of data we want here is W2 through W600. And it highlights that in red for you. Close parentheses and hit enter. So this here is our average of the 570 people that made a purchase with us. Our average was $11,763. Okay, for task 14, we'll go ahead and do task 14 really quickly. We're going to delete the contents of cells Z1 through AB3. So this was just for our reference. We don't need it anymore. Highlight those cells and then click delete. So you can't click backspace because that won't really work. That just clears the one cell that you're looking at. So find the delete on your keyboard. For me, it's next to my numbers keypad, but you need to find that delete option. If you can't find it, you can right click and then hit delete. But sometimes this messes up your formulas if there are other cells around it. So I would really recommend using the delete button on your computer. Okay, so that is the end of tasks 13 and 14. Task 15. In cell X1, type sales per call. I'm going to go ahead and do that. In cell X2, enter an if formula that calculates the annual dollars per sales call if the customer was called at least once and otherwise leaves the cell blank. Copy the formula down. Okay, so we're going to use an if function here. So basically this, again, it works similar to the count if. So you give Excel certain criteria or like a logical test, like it says here on the screen, that it needs to meet, and then it will give you a value if it meets that criteria, and then another value if it doesn't, and you can tell Excel exactly what you want those values to be. So our logics test here is that they were called. So we're looking for the annual dollars per sales call if they were called at least once. So that means we're going to look at the sum calls here, U2. So it's best if you can use like a direct cell reference by clicking on that cell. You never want to type in just like 18, for example, because then you can't drag that formula down. So we want that to be greater than 0. So what I just said here with what I typed in is that I want the number of times that this customer is called to be greater than 0. That's the logic that it needs to meet. Now the value, if that's true, so now we want to know the average, the annual dollars per sales call. So dollars, look in our dollars column. Anytime you hear the word per, think of divide, and per call. So we're going to go back here and click on U2. Okay, so by clicking on U2, this gives us the dollars per divided by call, and then hit a comma. So then when we look back on our instructions, we can see otherwise leave the cell blank. So if it doesn't meet this criteria of them being called at least once, then we're going to leave the cell blank. In order to do that, think of it as like air quotes. So you just add 2 quotation marks back to back that kind of represent a empty space in there. So like if you click in here, you can kind of think of it as an empty space. It's going to give you simply an empty cell, and then when you hit enter, it does that automatically, and then you can go ahead and drag that formula down. So here you can see it as an example of where it did not meet the criteria of being called at least one time, so it left the cell blank. Task 16, in cell Y1, type sales per call if purchased, and then in Y2, enter an if formula that calculates the annual dollars per sales call if the customer was called on at least once and they made at least one purchase, otherwise leave the cell blank. So this is going to look a lot like what we did in task 15, but this time we have 2 criterion that need to be met. Excuse me. So in order to do that, we're going to go here, sales per call if purchased. We're going to type in equals and then our if function. So first thing that we do here is type and. So that describes to Excel that we have more than one criteria that needs to be met, and they both need to be met. It's not either or, both of these criteria need to be met. So type in your and type in your first logic argument. So our first argument is that they were called at least once. So again, we're looking at calls. U2 needs to be greater than 0. And then hit a comma. And now we want to know if they made a purchase. So now we want V2 also to be greater than 0. Hit a closed parentheses. That's the end of our logic test, so you can hit a comma. Now you can see that Excel moves on here and bolds value if it's true. So this is the value, or like the value that Excel is going to return to this cell if both of those criteria are met. So we want, let's see here, it asked us for annual dollars per sales call. So again, we're going to look at dollars in column W, per, think divide by, and then call. Dollars per call is exactly what this W2 divided by U2 describes. Hit a comma. Now we're looking at value if false. So if either one or both of those criteria are not met, what value do we want Excel to put in that cell for us? And the instructions say that we leave it blank. So again, add your empty air quotes here, close your parentheses, and hit enter. Now you can go up here, double click on the bottom right hand corner to copy the formula down, and let's see if we can find an example. here we go. Here's a great example. So we can see that one of the criteria was met. They made at least one purchase, but because it didn't meet both of their criteria, we didn't call them more than 0 times. The cell was left blank by Excel. So that's just an example. That's a good way to, it's always good to go back and check when you add in these somewhat complex formulas and make sure that your work, that the formula is doing what you intended it to do. Alright, that was the end of task 16. Task 17, in cell Z1, type average purchase. And in cell, let's see here, use conditional formatting to shade the customer IDs of those customers with average purchase amounts over $100 that were not called on during the year. Okay, so let's break this down into 2 things. First thing that we need to do is calculate the average purchase and have that show up here in column Z. And then we'll go ahead and tackle the conditional formatting as the second part of task 17. So we're going to use another if function. So here we want to know if they made a purchase, so V2 is greater than 0, hit a comma. Value if true, we want to know what that average was. So the average of those purchases. So we're going to take W2 divided by the number of purchases. Now, so that's what it's going to return if it's true. So far what we have is if they made at least one purchase, so greater than 0 purchases, then give us the average. So it's going to be the dollars divided by the number of purchases is your average. But if it doesn't meet that criteria, we want this cell to be 0. Close your parentheses. Click up here and double click to drag the formula down. Okay, so now let's look at the second part of this here using conditional formatting. Shade customer IDs of customers with average purchase amounts over $100. So we're going to turn these customer IDs for customers who purchased $100 with us but who were not called. So these were really good customers for us, but they were customers without us even trying. We never even tried to call them. So let's highlight cells A2 through Z600. Okay, so I have my column A, 2 through A600 highlighted here. We're going to go up to the Home tab, click on Conditional Formatting. We have a new rule, and we're going to use a formula. So now we're going to build a formula that represents the instructions that we've been given. So we're going to hit equals, and then your AND to indicate that there's more than one criteria that needs to be met. The first criteria is that, let's see here, their average purchase was more than $100, so this Z2 is greater than 100, and it automatically, it automatically added in absolute references, which we don't want, because that would mean that it's going to always pull from Z2 when it's looking at this. Darn it. I might just have to type it in. Z2. There we go. It's always going to look at Z2 for this factor. which we don't want because each customer ID needs to be matched with their average purchase. So if we allow those dollar signs to be in there, it's always going to look at this average purchase for customer 134, which is not good. Okay, so there's our first criteria. The average purchase needs to be more than $100. Our second criteria is that they were never called, which means that U2, I'm just going to type it in so it doesn't add those dollar signs. U2 is equal to 0. Close your parentheses. Now click on Format over here. Hit Fill. Now you can pick whatever color you want. My favorite color is purple, so I'm going to pick purple. Hit OK. OK. And now we can see, when we scroll down, this customer was never called, but they spent an average of $1,230 with us. So that completes task number 17. Okay, task number 18 is a pretty basic but very useful task. So we're going to use find to locate a specific customer ID number. So if you look at home, go over to the very right hand side, hit find and select, then click on find. We're going to type in that customer ID number 12831, hit find next, and see here automatically this green box finds that customer's ID number for us. So that saves us the hassle of having to look through all 600 rows of our data set. Okay, you can go ahead and close out of that. So now for task 19, our last one. Create a pivot table beginning in cell AA3, averaging annual purchases by state and salesperson. So let's go over to AA3. That's right. Ooh, make sure you scroll back up to 3. Here we go. I'm in AA3. If you ever don't really know where you're at, you can always check which cell you're in right here. If the row number is too far away, you can always check right here in this name box. Okay, in AA3, we're going to insert a pivot table. But the first thing that we need to do is select all of the information that we want the pivot table to pull from. So we're going to select all of our information from cell A1 through W600. So give me just a minute. Okay, I have A1 through W600 selected. Now we're going to go to Insert, Pivot Table, into our existing worksheet in cell AA3, like the instructions told us. Hit OK. Okay, so the relevant information is what we're going to check the boxes for here. So we want annual purchases by state and salesperson. So here is state, here is salesperson, and we want purchases, oops. So you want to use some purchases, and then we can go ahead and change this to averages by clicking right here, hit value field settings, and change it to average so it meets the criteria that we were asked to show these based on averages rather than sums. Okay, so now let's put state into the columns. So we're going to have state be along the top, and the rows are going to be the salesperson's names. Now, if you exit out of this and scroll to the very top, you can see that we have our states here along the top. Our salesperson people are down here in the rows, and then these are the averages of average purchases based on the salesperson and relevant to the state that that salesperson was in. Okay, that completes task 19, which is also the end of our Excel project. So I hope that you learned some skills that were new, and hopefully that you'll find useful in your workplace. And if you have any questions about the content, or if there's anything that you didn't quite understand, I would first recommend that you go back through the video and watch it again and try yourself. But otherwise, don't hesitate to send me an email, and I'll put my email up here on the screen. Thank you!